In a landmark decision, the United States High Court has overturned a key Trump-era tariff policy, reshaping the nation's approach to international trade. The ruling dismantles the sweeping tariffs enacted under the guise of national security, shifting the balance of power back toward Congress. For years, these tariffs disrupted supply chains, raised costs for American businesses, and strained diplomatic ties. The court's decision is more than a legal technicality. It's a reset of U.S. trade policy, with immediate consequences for consumers, corporations, and global partners. For nearly a decade, tariffs dominated the economic landscape, introduced to protect American industries, but sparking global retaliation and uncertainty. The High Court's intervention ends this chapter, signaling a return to a more traditional, congressionally driven trade policy. The core issue: could the president wield such sweeping economic power alone? The case, brought by a coalition of American businesses, argued the executive branch had overstepped its constitutional authority. After years of legal battles, the 9 justices were tasked with interpreting a century-old trade law in a modern context. Their decision hinged on the limits of presidential power in the name of national security. The ruling invalidates specific tariffs, but unwinding them will be complex, involving federal agencies and international negotiations. For businesses, this reversal brings both opportunity and new challenges as they reevaluate supply chains and investment plans. The decision also raises questions about the future of American protectionism and the nation's role in global trade. As industries adjust, the legal and economic aftershocks will be felt for years. This moment sets the stage for a new era in U.S. economic policy. The Trump administration's tariff policy began in 2018, invoking a rarely used provision of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. Section 232 allowed the president to impose tariffs without Congress if imports threatened national security. This led to sweeping tariffs, 25% on steel, 10% on aluminum, aimed at protecting domestic producers and critical industries. The policy quickly expanded, targeting a wide array of Chinese goods under a different statute, citing intellectual property theft. The administration's goal use tariffs as leverage to force trading partners, especially China, to renegotiate trade deals. Supporters claimed the tariffs revived U.S. steel and aluminum production and would reduce the trade deficit. Critics argued the tariffs were a tax on American consumers and businesses, raising costs and making exports less competitive. Retaliatory tariffs from other countries hit U.S. agriculture and manufacturing, deepening the economic impact. The debate over the tariffs became a central issue in U.S. economic policy, dividing economists and policymakers. Ultimately, the tariffs were seen as both a negotiating tool and a symbol of the administration's America First agenda, but the costs and global backlash set the stage for the legal showdown that followed. The High Court's decision would determine the future of this controversial doctrine. The economic fallout from the tariffs was swift and far-reaching. Before the tariffs, U.S. industries relied on steady imports of steel and aluminum to keep costs down. After the tariffs, foreign steel was replaced by more expensive domestic steel, raising costs for manufacturers. Studies showed a temporary boost for U.S. steel producers, but downstream industries faced higher prices and job losses. Retaliatory tariffs from China, the EU, and others hit U.S. exports hard, especially agriculture. U.S. soybean exports to China, for example, plummeted from over $12 billion to just $3 billion in a single year. The government responded with multi-billion-dollar aid packages for affected farmers. Economic analyses concluded the tariffs' costs were passed on to U.S. consumers and businesses, resulting in an estimated $50 billion annual loss in real income. The tariffs failed to significantly reduce the overall trade deficit. Instead, imports shifted from China to other countries like Vietnam and Mexico, often at higher costs. The policy's ripple effects forced companies to rethink supply chains and pricing strategies. The data painted a clear picture. The tariffs' economic harm outweighed their intended benefits. The High Court's ruling now forces a reckoning with these outcomes. As the dust settles, industries and policymakers must adapt to a new trade reality. The numbers tell a story of disruption, adaptation, and the high price of protectionism. The legal battle that reached the High Court was the result of years of litigation by American businesses harmed by the tariffs. Their argument: the president had exceeded the authority granted by Congress, using national security as a broad justification for sweeping tariffs. The plaintiffs contended the Trade Expansion Act was never meant to give the president unchecked power over trade. They argued the law was designed for targeted emergencies, not as a tool for broad economic policy. The government countered that the president's actions were within the bounds of delegated authority, citing the need for flexibility in national security. The case moved through the courts, focusing on whether Congress had unconstitutionally delegated its legislative power to the president. The plaintiffs said the law lacked clear limits, while the government argued national security was a sufficient guiding principle. The legal fight became a test of the separation of powers and the limits of executive authority. The High Court was asked to decide, had the president overstepped, or was this within the law's intent? The answer would reshape the boundaries of presidential power in trade. At the heart of the case was the Constitution's separation of powers. Plaintiffs argued Section 232 let the president impose what were essentially taxes, Congress's job, without clear limits. They showed the tariffs caused direct harm, higher costs, lost contracts, layoffs. Historically, Section 232 was used sparingly for true emergencies, not as a routine economic tool. The Trump administration's broad use, they argued, upset the constitutional balance. Their plea restored Congress's role in trade policy. The government's defense centered on presidential discretion and legal precedent. They argued the president, with access to intelligence, is best positioned to judge national security threats. The Trade Expansion Act's language, as he deems necessary, was cited as proof of broad, intended authority. Past court decisions had shown deference to the executive on national security. The government insisted economic health of key industries like steel is tied to national security. They argued Congress could always amend the law if it disagreed with the president's actions. The case became a clash between executive flexibility and constitutional limits. On November 20, 2025, the High Court delivered its landmark decision. In a 6-3 vote, the court ruled the broad use of Section 232 tariffs was an overreach of executive authority. The majority opinion said the administration's interpretation of national security erased meaningful limits on presidential power, violating the non-delegation doctrine. The court reaffirmed that Congress, not the president, holds the power to regulate foreign commerce. The ruling invalidates the steel and aluminum tariffs, ordering their removal and refunds for duties collected. Section 232 remains, but its use is now tightly restricted to clear, direct threats to national security. Tariffs against China under a different statute were not affected. The dissent warned the decision could limit future presidents' ability to respond to economic threats. The ruling sets a new, stricter standard for executive action on trade. It marks a turning point in the balance of power over U.S. trade policy. The ruling sent shockwaves through the U.S. and global economies. With tariffs gone, American manufacturers expect lower input costs, potentially leading to cheaper consumer goods. Domestic steel and aluminum producers now face renewed global competition, raising fears of job losses and plant closures. Internationally, key trading partners welcome the decision, seeing it as a step toward easing trade tensions. Many countries are expected to lift retaliatory tariffs, boosting U.S. exports. The ruling is hailed as a win for the rules-based global trading system. Multinational companies must now reassess supply chains built to avoid tariffs. Some may revert to old suppliers, others will stick with new ones having absorbed transition costs. The abrupt policy shift creates both opportunities and disruptions as businesses adapt. The global trade landscape is entering a period of strategic reassessment. The High Court's decision closes one chapter of U.S. trade policy and opens another. By reining in executive power, the court returns trade authority to Congress, setting up new debates and compromises. Policymakers must now support industries facing renewed competition and seize new export opportunities. The Section 301 tariffs against China remain, creating a split in U.S. trade policy. The nation faces a crossroads. Will it return to free trade or maintain protectionist barriers? The ruling forces a fundamental re-examination of America's long-term trade strategy. The political and economic concerns that fueled protectionism remain unresolved. The future of U.S. trade policy, and who controls it, is now up for debate.